there's a notion in behavioral psychology called the fundamental attribution error, which is we bestow behaviors on people as if it's fundamentally their personality. They are bad people.
Yes.
Or in the case of change and change resistance, these people are resistors. Yeah. They may be showing signs of resistance or saying things that you don't agree with, that don't align up with your agenda.
Yes.
And then we label them resistors. And so what I'm saying is that's a bit of an illusion, because what would summarize a concept that would summarize my whole sort of thesis on resistance being a bit of an illusion is that what causes resistance for the most part is ambiguity. And most of the ambiguity is own goals. It's self-inflicted in projects.
Welcome to episode 53 of the Inner Game of Change podcast, where I focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing and enabling organizational change. I am Ali Juma, and this is the Inner Game of Change podcast. My guest today is Daniel Locke, a seasoned expert in the field of change management and communication, with over 2 decades of experience helping organizations tackle this challenging endeavor. Drawing from his extensive background, Daniel shares his proven strategies and real-world insight on how to navigate and ultimately conquer the hurdles of change resistance. In this episode, we'll dive deep into the art of decoding change resistance, explore the intricacies behind it, and more importantly, discuss a few actionable solutions every leader and change practitioner should know. I am grateful to have Daniel chatting with me today. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I'm grateful for your time today.
Certainly. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Daniel. I am talking to you from Melbourne, and you are overseas in Germany. But the beauty of technology is helping us work together. Hopefully, this is going to be a wonderful interview. Today, we are going to talk about change resistance, a very valid topic that applies to any change in any organization at any time. But before we dive deep into the topic, it will be fantastic, Daniel, to share something about you, who you are, and what you do.
Sure. So, first of all, I live in Germany now, but from my accent, you can tell that I'm not German. I just moved from Sydney recently to Germany. The connection is my wife is German. We have 2 young children now, and we wanted to live and work in Europe, in Germany specifically, where my wife grew up, so that our kids could get that culture as well as an opportunity for something different for us as adults. And look, so far so good. It's been a few months now, and we're really enjoying it. And it's working out. Daughter's just gone back to school, so it's been great. So that's the German connection. And in terms of change management, I've been in a specialist organisational change practitioner now for about 12 years. Before that, I was in project management and business analysis, process improvement world since around 2000 and about 2002 or so. So coming 20 odd or more years now in this whole sort of project and change and transformation field. Around 2011 or 12 rather, I was working with some change managers, and I was inspired. I thought I could do that. I'm practically doing it anyway in the work that I was doing.
Yes.
And I was looking for my next job as a project finished up, and I put my hand up to move to change management, and that worked out. So I ended up, moving into an adjacent field of and specialising in change management, although I'd never really worked in it before. And I just really found my home in that work. Really enjoyed it, thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's a growing field. It's been a growing field since then. And I've made a career out of it extraordinarily. It's just, when I look back on it like that, it's quite surprising, but it's really worked out for me, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Fantastic. And you and your family, Daniel, are going into change, moving location and country. I can relate to that. That's a huge change. It will come with some frustration and all of those things that are actually associated with any change. But it sounds like to make the change successful for you and for your family, you are driven by a purpose, which is, good life for you and for your family and all of those things. So you've got your why nailed.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point, and so important in change is that thinking about the stakeholders in my life. So my parents, my family, my friends. The first question they ask is, well, why are you moving? And for them, there's like a bit of a resistance because it's especially with your immediate family, you're far away. They won't get to see the children, so there's real drawbacks for them.
Yes.
And the positives seem to be only associated with me and our family and what we get, how we benefit from it. And so it was really important to have a clear, compelling rationale, but ultimately it's an emotionally driven why. And I think the same is true in business as it is in life.
Yes,
is we were like, well, now's the time. Like the children are the right age. Specifically, we really want them to have the culture, the language, and that European opportunity. It would be a shame, given that they've got passports, not to do it. And so we just really had to help people understand that. I think if it was like, we're going to move to the United States or to Singapore or Portugal for low tax purposes, that would be like really, really logical, right brain, like that left brain sort of stuff. And I think that it wouldn't make sense. But when you put the package together, there's a real need. We must go now because the kids are the right age. There's an emotional impact. There's an emotional payoff for it. And once I was able to explain that and enroll them in that idea, the defences started to melt away somewhat. And the same is true in organisational change. You've got to have this. There's got to be a reason for why now, why in this manner, and it can't just be about the numbers. We need to cut headcount. That doesn't make sense. We've got to have there's got to be a rationale. And even though people will have negative outcomes or they're not going to personally benefit so much from this change, at least in the first instance, because there's this emotion, the logic, the reason, and the emotional, and the why now. It all comes together in a nice package that people go, okay, I can get on board with that. And then they're willing to listen to the next steps.
And just remember also that without the change, you're not going to have a growth. So that growth is going to be for you, for your kids, and for your wife. And actually, the family also will have secondary benefits. They will come and visit you as well. I've gone through the motion, so I understand that. But I do remember when I wanted to leave home and travel and live in different countries, my mother was focused on why change the status quo. And that's the essence of, you can sit and do nothing and do like what everybody's doing, and you're probably going to end up with the same experience they get, or you choose the path that probably will challenge you and give you opportunities. And I've chosen the latter. So I completely relate to you. Today, we're going to talk about change resistance. So it sounds like you did not resist going overseas as part of your change. You've written recently an article where you shared your thoughts on LinkedIn around the illusion of resistance and change resistance. So that was going to be the base of our conversation today. First of all, I'm really curious, why did you call it the illusion of change resistance?
Yeah, so change resistance is a thing, but I think as change leaders and people rolling out change, that it's too often to just point the finger and we say these people are resisting, as opposed to looking at the process. So there's a notion in behavioral psychology called the fundamental attribution error, which is we bestow behaviors on people as if it's fundamentally their personality. They are bad people.
Yes.
Or in the case of change and change resistance, these people are resistors. Yeah. They may be showing signs of resistance or saying things that you don't agree with, that don't align up with your agenda.
Yes.
And then we label them resistors. And so what I'm saying is that's a bit of an illusion, because what would summarize a concept that would summarize my whole sort of thesis on resistance being a bit of an illusion is that what causes resistance for the most part is ambiguity. And most of the ambiguity is own goals. It's self-inflicted in projects. And the first place to look is ambiguity, unnecessary ambiguity that you are generating. Now, of course, ambiguity and uncertainty is inherent in change. And what I'm saying is we just don't need to make it worse for ourselves than we have to.
Yes.
And so if we think about ambiguity, there's the place to look. And in the particular article you're referring to is a model of change. I've just been posting various models of change from the, Kubler-Ross to Cotter and so on, and sort of just breaking that down into the fundamentals, knowing that a lot of my readers are change leaders. They're not change practitioners. They are sponsors. These are people who are general managers of businesses rolling out change, but they're not practitioners. And so just going through some of the fundamentals and some of the background, it's a useful conversation. And one in there there was the Noster model of change, which is a great model. And it basically has 5 or 6 components. And resistance and motivation is one of those components. But the other components are vision, the training, they are skills, resources. And these are all sources of ambiguity that we introduce into a change. And then we call it lack of motivation, or we call it, resistance.
Yeah.
Whereas if we can use that model, many of the other models, but this one's just a handy one that, we picked up on, is that you can use it as a bit of an audit, a bit of a checklist. Well, we're observing what we think is resistance, or let's call it people are not on board, or they're not coming along the journey. It's nothing that's, first of all, fundamental attribution error. It's nothing that wrong with them per se. Let's have a look at our process. Where can we improve the way we're rolling out change to see, better outcomes?
Yeah. Showing resistance, what you're saying is, what I hear you say anyway, showing resistance is a natural part of change anyway. It's important for us to acknowledge it, anticipate it, and hopefully try to mitigate it as well by doing all of those things, clear vision, clear communication, all of those things. Have I got this close to right?
Yeah, look, I think like everybody, first of all, people are going along their own path in life, their own vision. First I'll say is people change of their own volition all the time. We've just moved to Germany. It's a big change. Then it's about managing that process for yourself, but also for your stakeholders. And the first thing is, as change leaders have been sitting with this change proposal for at least months, if not a year or more, before anything is even communicated to the next level down, let alone employees and end users. And so their whole personal journey is much farther ahead. It's a little wonder that the first time you introduce this change, you get people sort of backing up saying, hey, I don't know about this. I don't know. I'm not sure about this. Why do we need to do this? Yeah. And it's frustrating for leaders who are busy and they are moving fast. I've been sitting with this change personally for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, 12 months. And now they start to roll it out and they're like, I want to be moving. Why are these people resisting? They're not getting on board. Like, that's the first thing, is we need to understand that people go through their own journey and you've just landed this on them, but you've been through your own personal journey, for a long time. And in that Noster model of change, one of the first things to have a look at is the vision. And if you've got the vision there that isn't clarified, then you're just creating confusion for people. And the first one is, I want to move to Germany. I'm just thinking of my parents. The first one is why? Why would you do that? Now, my mother, of course, knows my wife is German. She knows that the kids have got a German passport, but it occurs like, why do this? This makes no sense. Confusion is that first thing. And if you haven't really nailed down that vision, why we're changing, why it's important, and allow time for that to sink in, have a conversation about it, enroll people in it, and allow them to move through it, you'll just get confusion. And that's just that first sign of resistance, which is, I don't want anything to do with this.
What do you say about, so you talked about let that sink in. So you're talking about time, allow time for things to be understood. The challenge though, Daniel, as you would know, that projects are driven by a timeline. So how do you manage this challenge of a linear timeline? Somebody's wanting it, the project manager usually has got the three constraints: time, budget, and scope. Sometimes, unfortunately, also we get introduced to the change ourselves as a practitioners late in the piece as well. So what's your experience with that, and what are some of the strategies that we can apply in there to still manage the timeline, but also allow that simmering to happen early in the stage?
Well, first of all, for best results, get your change practitioners in there at the beginning of the project.
Yes.
And if you bring them in late, there's only so much they can do. Yes. Now, there's ends of the spectrums here. If you're in a crisis mode and you need to act fast, then the autocratic style of leadership is what makes sense. I think getting in there and running engagement meetings when, there's the lines at the door isn't appropriate, and people will look at you weirdly if you do it. And I've never really seen anybody try to do that, but obviously that's not going to happen. And so then we've got the other end of the spectrum where like timelines are narrowing in and people are really unhappy, and then the change practitioner comes in and then we've got deadlines to hit. Well, first of all, there's going to be some collateral damage there. And because this work takes time, in the same way you can't get a project up and running and a project manager can't, if the timeline is fixed, then you're going to have to spend more money on it, or you're going to have to lower your quality, right? Like these are the realities of the situation. And in change, you need time to engage people and bring them along and have them and flesh out the second order impacts that are going to happen from this change through the range of stakeholders in the organisation. And so the way I manage, I've been in both situations. Come in on projects where the change management part of it, is blazing red and we've got to get it back on track. And then the first thing to do is to catalogue what's this is to effectively go through a bit of a checklist, like why are we doing this? Why is this important? And then getting in there and understanding the impacts, second order effects, and having in the weeds of change, and getting in there with the stakeholders and really working through the impacts and the implications on them with a huge degree of empathy, and then understanding whether we need to make changes to the proposal or how we're going to support these people through this sort of difficult time. But you can't work miracles. If there isn't insufficient time, then there's likely collateral damage, and that can really hurt the reputation of a business, of an organisation. This goes to the case for change, right? This can really hurt the reputation, both from hiring employees, great place to work, engagement, productivity. Productivity now and in the future can drop. The benefits of that change will not be realised as well. Like these are all the reasons why we talk to people about bringing us in early, so that we can maximise the benefits of change. Otherwise, really, it's quite difficult. But I would say there's no silver bullet on this.
It is challenging. From my experience, sometimes even the problem can be compounded by the fact that an organization uses external consultants who charge by the day, and therefore time is of essence. And so that's what really the realities of the situation. But you were right. I think it's important for us to not educate, but advise the leaders. I'm sure they understand, but advise the leaders that time is important, and time is money. Yes, we get that. But would you be prepared to be spending a lot of time at the outset of things, or later when you try to fix problems, if the change is not implemented properly? I want to ask you I need your thoughts on this, because I've been thinking about this for a while. Resistance can happen at any stage during the rollout of the change, but also the flavor of the resistance changes. So you can have resistance at the start of the whole, why we're doing it, all the way to the resistance of, I don't want to do it face-to-face as in training and all of that. I want to do it online and all of those things. Is that your experience?
Oh, yeah. I guess there's change, the resistance about the proposal itself or the solution itself, and there's resistance to the methods and alternatives for the delivery of that change.
Yes.
There's resistance all the way through, and it's all appropriate because, if you're getting a lot of pushback on training, perhaps you're looking to bring people in for face-to-face training.
Yep.
Perhaps you're implementing a CRM system I'm talking to salespeople, they're out in the field, they're going to come into the head office, maybe an interstate trip for a day or two of training. This is going to impact their own goals that they have for themselves, KPIs. It's time out of the field, it's time away from speaking with customers. And they just hate it. Hate it. Now, they're not necessarily opposed to the CRM system, but this approach of the training is really causing them angst, and it's reasonable. I think the thing we've got to work through, what are the trade-offs? Like, is there another way to do it? Like, you just got to work through the alternatives for what you're trying to achieve with this, and then start to come to a view, and again, enroll people in why this is the best approach, why we have to do it this way, and how you can support them in achieving their goals, while the greater goals of the organisation are being looked at. This, in and of itself, goes a lot to there being too much change in an organisation at any one time. There's sort of the complex, chaotic nature of organisations in the modern world is that usually you're not speaking to people in isolation of your particular project. There's been many projects failed or successful in the past, so there's that context. There's many other initiatives outside of yours that are being pulled on them. There's HR considerations. There's other projects that they may be involved with or impacted either directly or indirectly by. And so there's this whole world of consideration that goes to this underlying sort of resistance, if you will, that's very much compounded in the current organisation.
There's also resistance that comes, which I call invisible to us as practitioners, that comes from internal power struggles and agendas. And so they may not resist the change per se and the rollout. They might resist the strategy and how this is all linked together. Like I had an experience a couple of years ago when they believed in the change and everything is fine, but they needed to do another piece before this particular change, and that piece was not really in the financial budget and all of those things. And all of a sudden we've got a problem in there. So I guess my point is that as practitioners, we have to really understand where the resistance is coming from and try to mitigate it as much as we can within our scope and within our control as much as we can. But there will be things that will be outside of our control as well, things that we cannot see sometimes. And these things happen. Also, to your point around, for example, I mentioned the example of training. I do believe that we almost go through a cycle of change management with each stage of the project. So yes, you engage at the start about the design and all of those things. You engage at the UAT period. You engage at the training because there's a vulnerability in the relationship, a psychological contract that we need to negotiate every day on each stage of the project, all the way to the end. So I've seen people, and changes that happen really smoothly, and then we allow 2 weeks for adoption, and then we close it. And so, and so all of a sudden, we have spoiled the whole experience that we spent so much time and effort on. And so, again, going back to that timeline, but also as practitioners, we gotta have to think that we go every single day was almost like renegotiating that psychological contract with the stakeholders. What's your take on that?
Well, a couple of things strike me. So just to go to your first point about these sort of hidden incentives and effects. So some changes will affect people's. So let's take a hypothetical example of a middle manager nodding and saying yes, and then nothing happens. Like that, actually, nothing happens of the commitments that they're supposed to make for their particular area of domain. And then it's not uncommon to find out that this particular change and the way it's perceived for them, in either in reality or otherwise, is that it means that they're not going to hit their bonus, they're not, or maybe their promotional aspirations are now jeopardized, or very clearly not going to happen because of this change. And they might be trying to protect their image in the organisation, so they're nodding and saying yes, but then nothing actually happens. You really need to be sensitive to the type of stuff And this is the real organizational dynamics or politics,
Yes.
if you will, that plays out in an organization. And Tom Peters, there's an article by Tom Peters that I encourage your listeners to look up. It's about politics. So search sort of Tom Peters politics. And he says work is politics. And he's right. Like, this is the stuff that gets behind, that will trip up a change program, because you don't have a line of sight as to these second order impacts, negative or otherwise, that people are dealing with. And so you need to look at the range of dynamics there.
Yes.
To your second point, I totally agree with sort of the nested change cycles that you go through from the beginning of the project. It's one thing to get people all excited about the grand vision, but when it comes time to rubber hits the road and we need subject matter experts to come and perform UAT, and you've got a daily operations to manage, we've all seen this in technology implementations. They give you the sort of worst people, and so all of a sudden, what's the quality of your testing, because they don't really know what they're supposed to be testing for. So you got a whole issue here to work through. What I have found in my role as being change practitioner is there's a lot of education that needs to happen for sponsors and general managers of businesses about the change program. And so you need the project manager as well as the change manager to educate the business. Okay, we're going into UAT. Like, do you really understand what's required and what's expected and what the norms are? Yes. And I'll tell you, like, you would think that, in organizations that they should know this, but they don't all know this. I've worked in some very large organizations recently where rolling out significant technological change with significant risk. And they really don't understand the process. And you need to explain to them, okay, we're about to go into UAT. This is the purpose of UAT.
Yes.
I'd expect out of our user base, we'd expect about this many people to come in and support UAT. Do you have a line of sight whether or not you can support that in your business? Because you don't want to get there, because to your point about resistance and timeliness, they need advance warning to be able to release that amount of people to support the project as well. Mm-hmm. And so they may not, it's not so much that they're not on board with the project itself. It's just, you're coming to me and you're asking for people in a week's time. I've got a business to operate. And so you need to be cognizant of these kind of operational daily activities that are important to projects and organizations and the general managers that are managing those departments. And again, is this resistance coming from that middle management? No, not necessarily. It's just the vagaries of projects and the own goals that we have. And that if you can run a good process, you can actually eliminate or reduce a lot of this so-called resistance.
And that comes from experience, that comes from insight. This is why I'm not a big believer that you can get a change manager to join a project at the start when it's already started, and then for 3 months and you get rid of them, because I just cannot believe that they actually can manage that without insight, without really understanding a lot of moving parts in there. Otherwise, you'll turn into what we call a triaging person. You just do things and then tick the boxes, and that's about it. Absolutely no skin in the game and no interested in how this is going to impact the organization. I want to ask you, if we are not good at managing resistance or understanding it, identifying it, and therefore thinking about ways to mitigate resistance, what will be the implication for a business unit or an organization?
Well, there's very direct impacts in terms of productivity, both throughout the project, the lost productivity as the change is underway, and then also the lost productivity in terms of optimizing the benefits of change. And the reason why change managers are assigned and brought into large-scale projects is because there's people impacts, and someone's recognised that how important it is. Certainly in the Australian context, in corporates now, it's usually mandated that there's change management resources are allocated to projects, and certainly that change management artifacts are required, throughout the process. Not that an artifact means good change management has been conducted at all. But certainly the implications of poorly managing resistance or change in general is the productivity impacts that you'll get a lot of people, dropping tools, so to speak, gossiping to their colleagues, not actually doing work during the project. This is, during the build stages of a project. And then as you implement, this could impact productivity in terms of the take-up of of the system, the policy, the change, the ways of working. Now, and this can very directly impact the bottom line in terms of customers, productivity of doing things, but also risk. And it can significantly enhance operational risk. And I think that's probably the big one that goes unseen in organisations is operational risk. Operational risk, essentially, all that non-financial risk in an organisation is everywhere. It is just everywhere, and it's very much invisible until it's a problem. And then again, this is where good change management and good practice of engaging early and often and throughout and resolving those issues and impacts that you see can have a significant impact on business. And I'd say the Australian context and certainly operational risk and non-financial risk throughout the world is becoming increasingly important. And certainly I think change management goes a long way to mitigating that and providing good structures to minimise operational risk that gets introduced with new ways of working.
And I do believe strongly in the fact that left unmanaged over time, because as you said before, I think we were having a conversation as part of the discussion around that change. One change is not happening out of context. There are a lot of other changes happening at the same time. If resistance is left unmanaged and we just have the attitude of, well, it is what it is and we're just going to have to move on, it's got a direct impact on employee engagement and actually also psychological impact on people as well. It can create anxiety, it can create stress, and if left unattended to or unmanaged or uncared for, it can create a lot of other complex problems for the organizations.
Certainly, and I think that a big area that I'm seeing growth in terms of change management, both by recognition of organisations and an area for the change managers to step in play, is that change portfolio management.
Yes.
So there's managing the portfolio of projects, but having a look at it. What is the range of impacts? How do they meet together? And how do they impact people? And if you've got many impact going into one group or cohort, you're causing them real problems and real strife.
Yeah.
And this is a challenging problem both from a data collection point of view, and it's a challenging problem from interpreting that information, and it's a challenging problem from just the dynamic nature of projects, and things change pretty quickly from month to month, quarter to quarter. And so you can have a view of the future. That there is no conflict, so there is no convergence of projects at a given time, but then very quickly that can change, that picture. And how do you handle that? And so I think that's a really big, that goes to the agile organisation, but that's a big area at the moment. I think that's having significant opportunity for organisations is change portfolio management.
Yeah, which helps manage any saturation and conflict.
That's right.
Change, which ultimately
is
create
another source of resistance.
Yes, which ultimately can create obviously change fatigue and change burnout as well. We are coming close to the end of the podcast, Daniel. I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation. I want to ask you one last question, which is around, we talk a lot about us trying to uncover where resistance is coming from. One of the things that I've worked to my advantage is that I've been articulate enough, brave enough to ask the organization literally, where do you expect resistance to come from? So sometimes we need to be overt about asking the question, because the organization has got a responsibility to provide us with this information. What's your take on that?
Oh, absolutely. And it's absolutely critical. Usually it comes out early in the conversations. People will tell you, he's a prickly stakeholder.
Yes.
She's a difficult one. And, often it used to be my early marker, I better be sensitive around that person. But usually, why? Why would a person be resistant? Well, usually you find out, their areas, significant impacts, and it's going to mean it's a problem for them. And no wonder they're defensive. And so it doesn't, but I like the idea of overtly asking and saying, where do you expect the sources of resistance to come from? But then you've got to go and validate that, because it's not always right.
Absolutely. Wonderful. I usually ask my guests Daniel, to give me 3 things that you would like my listeners, leaders or practitioners or even employees to think about when it comes to create a culture where resistance is being managed and respected. What would be your top 3 key takeaways?
So, number one, I think it's really important to have a good, solid rationale that hits the logic and emotional reasons for change, and it's got to be like a cogent conversation, and you got to get out there and then get out there and enroll people. Now that's a nested conversation, as we said. There's the outset, everybody gets excited, yes. But then it's about nesting that into each phase of the program as you move through it. Number 2 is in terms of resistance, people tend not to resist what they are involved with. So the degree to which, and particularly in complex, chaotic environments or where you've got a high degree of autonomy in terms of professionals. So, I'm thinking of, I worked on a non-financial risk project, was one of the most recent ones. And we're talking about senior people, high-level executives or strident, professionals. You really got to get them involved. And I find one of the better ways to do that is to run large-scale workshops, getting 30, 40, 50, even 60 people in a room over a day or two to work through issues. And a lot of people think, gee, a meeting that size, how can you make it work? Actually, you can make them work really well. They're very effective at mitigating resistance and getting issues out on the table and proper solutions and building empathy with the right leadership, project leadership, listening to those particular issues firsthand. Super important, very effective. And the third thing is labeling people as resistors is unhelpful ultimately. And even if they are being unreasonable, a better perspective to take is, okay, well, can I take responsibility and get ahead of things here by looking at our process? Maybe we've missed something. Where else can we look? What are we missing here? Or do we just need to have a high degree of empathy for this person and look to uncover their second order or hidden impacts on those groups, and how can we support them through the process?
Fantastic. And I like the idea, which actually I practice that idea at a smaller scale, which is what I call think tank, or even sometimes the technique is called pre-mortem readiness, which is before we even go into that, can you anticipate how this is going to go wrong? And it can go like the design and the people, all of those things. So I really like that. And I also like that we gotta have to suspend our judgment when it comes to people's behavior and try to be as empathetic as possible. I know sometimes it's really hard, but if we decide to play in the business of managing change and helping people adopt a change, then we're gonna have to have that quality in our behavior. That's my belief anyway. Daniel, I'm grateful for your time. I'm really enjoying this conversation. One last thing, how do people get hold of you and contact you?
Yeah, so for me, simplest two ways are probably the best way. One is my website through that way, which is daniellock.com. So it's very easy to remember, spelled L-O-C-K. And on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn. So again, if you look up my name on LinkedIn, follow my work, send a connection request or send me a DM, happy to talk.
Fantastic. And we're going to put all the information in the podcast episode section. It's been a pleasure having you on the Inner Game of Change podcast, Daniel. I wish you luck and I wish you a happy change for you and for your family in Germany. And I hope to get you back perhaps in the new year. And we're going to uncover those strategies that we can do as part of the readiness for big changes in the workplace, including the 3 takeaways that you've mentioned. But until next time, stay well and stay safe.
Thank you, Ali. Pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on this insightful journey into the world of change management and decoding resistance. If you found this episode valuable, remember subscribe to stay updated on upcoming episodes. Your support means the world to me. And by sharing this podcast with your colleagues, friends, and fellow change practitioners, you can help me reach even more individuals and professionals who can benefit from these discussions. Remember, Change is an enduring force, and collectively, we have the capacity to navigate it more effectively. Stay motivated, keep expanding your knowledge, and be the positive change contributor in your circles and work. Until next time, thank you for being part of the Inner Game of Change community.
It's terrific. Great questions. I enjoyed that more than I thought.